situation, which is obviously what it is currently today.
You look to what we saw more recently in Egypt. When a country goes into protest mode, they stay in that perpetual protest mode until they feel some sort of stability. So, unbeknownst to most Americans, what causes a person to go out onto the streets and protest? It's not these lofty ideas about, democracy and liberty and justice. It's not. It's putting bread on the table. It's putting your kids in school. It's having opportunities. It's doing all of that. And even though those weren't the initial reasons why people came out onto the streets, it was the reason why people stayed on the streets. And once the Ayatollah Khomeini took over, he had a hard time harnessing the country back. So what did they do? They got themselves involved in the Iran-Iraq war. When you involve yourself in a war where young people are being maimed, they're being killed, what do? You call them martyrs. You start giving handouts to their family members. You rally people around the flag, and you bring the Iranians in and make them a bit more pro-government because we have an external conflict. And what is that conflict now? A full-fledged war between Iran and Iraq that lasted for most of the 80s.
Right.
So because of that, they basically put the people to sleep and said, you know what, we need you to be with us right now because we have bigger issues. Young men were sent out to war, so almost every family had someone who was killed or maimed again, and the chemical warfare that was going on in the Iran-Iraq war. And that's where people become, that becomes a new normal. It becomes what they know. And throughout that time, it was calmer, I should say. And in the 90s, we began to see student uprisings again and again, saying, this is not what our parents or we
in Iran,
we protested for. This is not what we wanted. And we saw something very similar in Egypt recently in the Arab Spring. But you're very right to say that many of the movements we've seen in the Middle East, they took a page from the Iranian handbook of 1979. This can happen to us. If we create a political vacuum, this can happen to us. Something much worse can come in. And usually, what is that something much worse? It's that extremist Islamic politics, because they are well organized, they have the funding, they come in and they become the infallible voice of this regime, because you can't argue with a theocracy.
I want to ask a question because you brought up how we see people on the left, particularly actresses and singers, really sort of romanticize the Middle East, I think would be the right word to say that. And I'm going to use an example here, just some anecdotal evidence. I think a few days ago, we saw Rose McGowan, and she's sort of the ground zero of the Me Too movement, I think it's appropriate to say, issue a statement in support for Iran. It actually was a blubbering apology on behalf of all Americans pleading with Iran and saying that we in America live under a dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very ironic because then just 2 days later, Harvey Weinstein, who she has been obviously championing against with the Me Too movement, was found guilty of rape, and she gave out a cheer and said hooray. And I thought, this is really interesting, right? So in her mind, and rightfully so, a man that rapes a woman is a bad person. But the entire Iranian regime is something that she should get on her knees for and apologize for, and it's a place that's safe when weighed against America.
Right.
I'm just interested in how that rationale happens.
No, my only reaction to all of this is always, how did we get here?
Right.
How did we get to a place where someone can sit comfortably in their home in West Hollywood or wherever she is and have Stockholm Syndrome for a brutal regime that rapes, kills, that hangs, and particularly with regards to human rights, this regime has been so egregious. Again, targeting young women and come out onto the streets. They just killed 1,500 people. And this guy Soleimani, who was killed, that she had so much remorse about his killing, he ordered those killings of the 1,500. He was quoted to say, we should have killed 1 million people to get these protesters off the streets. I mean, how can you be so hypocritical if you feel so strongly about certain views? And as you said, correctly, you should be against rape, and you should be against, you should be for women's rights, but you can't pick and choose just because you don't like this president. The most damaging thing that I've always written about it, and always say, and I know that you do the same type of work, is to say, whatever you're doing right now, this is talking about political activists and people in Hollywood, whatever you're going to do right now is far going to outlast this country. And it's going to be a part of the patchwork of this country. And it's going to damage our political culture, our pop culture, where we stand. I mean, look at where we're putting the barometer. You're apologizing to a brutal regime that shoots protesters, that hangs women. I mean, there's a case, if you want to compare apples to apples, there's a case that I covered, and I got an interview with the mother of a young girl, Rayhana, who was hanged because she brought a case against a man who allegedly raped her.
Wow. So let's pause there, actually, because I want to talk about rights, or non-rights, rather, for Iranian women. It's something that I've been reading into a bit. What is life like, and correct me if I'm wrong, women in Iran are seen, their lives are seen as half of that of a man?
Exactly.
Is that correct?
That's Sharia law.
That's Sharia law.
That's Sharia law.
Okay, so that is the law in Iran, that
Right.
their value of a woman's life is half that of a man.
And it's literal, meaning if you take a witness into court, that woman is equal to half a person. So you have to bring two women to equal one man. If you are talking about, forget about divorce, only a man can bring divorce, meaning agree to it. If a woman wants out of a marriage, she basically has to escape. If you divorce, the husband gets children, no questions asked. If he's violent, if he's an alcoholic, if he's a drug addict, doesn't matter. These are the laws. With property rights, same thing. So this is the law. This is not just a cultural perception of a woman being half that of a man. In recent years, we have seen many movements that have given a voice to the women of Iran, basically highlighting their courage. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of pictures coming out of Iran where a woman will stand on basically, at a phone booth or something and
vividly recall this.
And taking off her hijab. This is the stealthy women's movement that was brought by journalist and activist Masih Al-Hijab. She's given a lot of women in Iran a platform to basically voice their opinions. Now, this has gotten a lot of them in trouble. A lot of them have been arrested. A lot of them have been killed to make an example out of them. But I think the women in Iran, as in any culture, as in all women around the world, these are the courageous women. These are the feminists that we should be really championing their voice, their platforms. I think that whenever people are stifled, they become stifled for a certain period of time. And in this case, it's very unfortunate because this regime has been in place for 40 years, and that's more than one generation. Meaning and there was a baby boom at that time during the Iran-Iraq War because the Khomeini would encourage people, we're losing a lot of children, we need to have more children. So because of that baby boom, we talk about an 80 million population in Iran, and a large percentage of that, 67% or more, are under the age of 40. This regime is living now. This is a way of life for them.
So within America, do your parents still keep a tight network of Iranian Americans, perhaps people that fled at the same time with them, at the same time as your parents fled from Iran?
They do. I mean, I have a very, very, my family's very, I would say, not unique in this way, but I think my parents, we didn't grow up in an expat community. We grew up in northern New Jersey, right outside of New York City. And my parents actually made an effort for us to assimilate and to speak English very well, and they didn't see a conflict between keeping our Iranian roots, but also being fully American.
Right. What is the sentiment, though? What I'm trying to get at is, what is the sentiment amongst Iranian Americans? It's something that I'm interested in. People that fled this country for an opportunity. I mean, and we can say the same thing about this in terms of people that have fled from Cuba. I mean, there's so many different countries that people flee from. Then you get to America, and you see people that are saying America is a horrible place to live. America's a dictatorship. People that routinely can say horrible things about the president, can threaten the president's lives and the president's life, whether it's in jest or in sincerity. And saying that they hope terrible things happen to the president. And they're allowed to do that here because we have freedom of speech, right? And hearing them say that they're oppressed, right? That they feel like they're living in a dictatorship. What is the sentiment amongst the community people that have actually lived under systems of oppression?
Right. I think there's two, I think this is a gross generalization, but if I were to kind of break it down for you, I think the majority of Iranian Americans, particularly those who either fled before the revolution, during the revolution, or just after the revolution, they remember it very, very, very well. And they don't take anything for granted. Their children are all very, very highly educated. They push their children to assimilate. They love this country. They want better for Iran. Those are usually the Iranians that push for regime change. They're very happy, regardless of the political party, for any politician, any president to push for regime change or to push for a better Iran. So they don't see, for example, when Donald Trump pulls out of the Iran nuclear deal in May 2018, most of those Iranians that I'm referring to
Wait a minute. Shit. Knew it. Didn't start thing wrong. You're too slick. Dang it. Little bit. How? Oh shoot.
I did it.
Woo! I did the first correct cut. I feel good about myself now. Good, not spicy now. Oi, come back on. Okay, this is all inky. Can't see anything. Okay. shoot. Mm. Okay. No, shoot. Dang it. I think I messed it up again. Shoot. Cut my guide again. Let's see what happens. Dang it. Hi. What you need?
Why?
Never enough. Never enough.
Apparently, quarantine has turned me into a raging alcoholic. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oldies can shorten your cold by 42%. Might not make your first day 42% better. Shorten your cold with Oldies, guaranteed. Oldies Plus Defense Chewable Gels help promote immune health. Buy now and be prepared for the season.
Most of those Iranians that I'm referring to were very happy because they understand that it's a punishment for the regime and not the people, even though the people will be sanctioned, right? So they see the difference and they see that it has to get worse before it gets better. And maybe the Iranian people have to, take that burden of, economic hardship, go out and protest, but it will get better. This group would be for that. Another group I would say is the much smaller minority of the Iranian expats. They probably are more recent immigrants, and they have a softer place in their heart for the Iranian people, of course, and the Iranian regime. I don't know if that also could be called Stockholm syndrome, or if it could be something that they see as, let's stay in the nuclear deal, let's use diplomatic means, let's use appeasement as a way of either dealing with the Iranian regime or at least having a bit more breathing space for the Iranian people. And I don't understand that argument as well, only because we've seen that appeasement doesn't work. And I think that more importantly,
sorry to cut you off, but it could be simply that they're just tethered to the relatives that are still there.
They are, but even the
there.
Iranians who are in Iran, I think that's a better litmus test to this whole conversation, right? When you say, I can have sympathy, I can't have empathy for the people, but I'm not there. I'm not there. I can't really feel what the economic pressures. The bottom line is that, yes, the sanctions are affecting the people, but only because the regime is allowing the people to face the burden of the sanctions.
But then also, even if you run the opposite argument, I mean, when Obama sent $1 billion in cash to the Iranian people, the Iranian people didn't see that money.
And they know that, right? That's the difference that's most important. Years ago, the Iranian regime had really brainwashed the Iranian people to say, death to America, death to Israel. That was their go-to protests. Allah Akbar, death to America, death to Israel. Any protest you go to, you see these slogans being said. What are the slogans today? Not Gaza, not Lebanon, I only live for Iran. It rhymes beautifully in English and in Farsi, so all the slogans rhyme, so it's always such an injustice to translate them. But in this case,
say it in Farsi.
It's so they're basically saying, stop putting our money into terrorism. We know what you're, they're wise now. They understand. They understand that the money that the government got never went to the mainstream economy, never went to better the lives of Iranians, but only went into terrorism. And they're very much aware of it. For every video that comes out about the funeral of the procession of the Soleimani funeral, there are so many videos that are sent to me that I posted on my website with cakes that say, way to go Trump, or dance parties where they're just showing their feet because they don't want their faces to be shown, but celebrations in honor of the killing of COSM Soleimani.
Right, because I did see the images, and to be clear about what I did see, there were tens of thousands of people in his hometown, right, in Soleimani's hometown, that were rushing and mourning his death. So at some level, he was appreciated. Maybe he was a hometown hero.
Or I can offer you another.
I would love it. Yeah.
Okay, so this has been for years. People would say to me, I saw, the Friday prayers. That's when they give their big sermon. That's when they say death to America. That's when the big leaders, the Khamenei and the all the Ayatollahs line up and they give their big sermons on a Friday. That's when people would say to me, but look how many people are there. And I'm like, yes, but you know what? A lot of people are required by their work to go there. A lot of people are offered free lunch to go there. A lot of people it's mandatory to be there. So for the 3 days that the country mourned Soleimani, was everything shut down. All the stores were closed, schools were out, work was out. Many people were required by their work to go there. The government reported that 1 million people were there. It's impossible when you look at the size of the street, when you look at the extent of the space that they had for them to be there. Yes, thousands of people were there. I also saw
many examples of that in history too, where people are required to be there, and particularly in Russia and Romania, Ceausescu. Remember, But when that big thing happened on camera, he actually required everyone to come out and pretend that people were happy, even though they were suffering under this like evil regime.
Exactly.
And then one day it tripped forward, and you realize that all these people were required to be there, and it was basically a show for the rest of the world to see.
First of all, that. Second of all, it's exactly what you always talk about. This regime went after the lower socioeconomic brackets, and that is how they, if they do have a following, if they do have loyal followers, it's because they get checks from the government, right? So after the Iran-Iraq war, who's sending their kids off? It's not it's not the higher end families in Tehran, because their kids are at Harvard University. It's the lower socioeconomic brackets where they have to send their children off to war. Their children die, or they become suicide bombers, or they become, fill in the blank. They get checks from the government, and because of that, you saw videos of Ahmadinejad, the previous president, where there was 2009 Green Revolution started in the aftermath of his re-election. He would walk down the streets in these parades, and he would just hand out money, in cities where these people would take to it. We can draw that parallel here in this country as well. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. You don't have to follow the government because they are asking you to, because they're considering you the low-hanging fruit. Right? Think for yourselves. And I think with the Iranian people, those groups are so stifled. Their children become victims to the government because they're asked to give up their children in order to support the government.
Let's actually talk about the government. I think right now a main concern that a lot of people have is that we're going to go to war with Iran, particularly because the leaders of Iran keep saying that they are going to answer, and they're issuing all of these threats, and they've made something like 30 to 50 U.S. targets around the world. They're saying that they have the ability to bring a lot of damage to. What do you make of those threats?
Well, there's World War III will not happen. Why not? Because Iran just doesn't have the resources.
Infrastructure, really.
The sanctions are working. The pressure campaign the Trump administration has applied to the Iranian regime has worked. It doesn't totally work in the sense that this was a big hit. But even before this hit, we saw the vulnerability of the Iranian regime because we would hear these threats every day. They weren't reported. And again, it brings us to the fact that we only woke up to this Iranian threat because of Qasem Soleimani. This threat existed. This chest thumping that the Iranian regime does was going on every single day. Will there be a full-fledged war? Absolutely not. They don't have the resources. They wouldn't want to get themselves involved in such a war, and they would never be able to show up against the United States.
So that's bluffing, right?
Well, they're bluffing, but they do have, we can talk about asymmetric warfare, right? We can talk about proxy warfare, which is exactly what they set themselves up to do. After 1979, after this regime took over for 40 years, their agenda was to spread their version of the Islamic State. They were the original Islamic State. They were the Shiite Islamic State. They wanted hegemony in the region. They wanted to spread their influence, spread their power. What did they do? They set themselves up wherever they could. So first it was in supporting Hezbollah in Lebanon to do their dirty work in the region. Then it became Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Gaza, and now Latin America. We should be, we have to wake up to this. If not before, now we definitely have to face the fact that we do have Iranian assets in South America, right at the footstep of the United States. They've set themselves up in the form of Basij, in the form of Hezbollah. They've set up cultural centers in places like Uruguay, in Bolivia, in Peru, in Brazil, in Venezuela, of course, in Argentina. There are cases and there are experts who follow these influences on the ground there. And it's, again, something that we haven't been paying attention to, but becomes more important now because that's where they can do the damage. We can talk about a cyber attack. We can talk about a proxy attack. But a full-fledged World War III is not.
What do you make of their influence on Iraq over the years? Because I think I was reading an article, and I don't know if it's true, so you feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, that they really have been able to really spread their influence in Iraq, and they've sort of got a stranglehold on it. And we're seeing a lot of people in Iraq come out and be in support of them and saying that this should never happen. Obviously, it happened at Baghdad airport. So is that, am I reading that correctly? Are we getting a fair knowledge of what's happening in Iraq right now? Are they essentially becoming...
They're part of the government. And I think there was a breaking point where the Iraqis looked at themselves and said, look, we don't know how to nation build. And here we are, political vacuum. And the Iranians are here. Something's got to give, so let's work with them. Kind of like what we're doing with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. We have to bring them to the table if they're going to be here anyway. And the Iranian influence in Iraq was very strong. It has been for many, many years, but it dwindled quite a bit when we had a bigger presence in Iraq, of course.
Right.
When we left, we created a bigger political vacuum, a bigger opportunity for them. So now we have members of their parliament that are from the Iranian militias. You have this presence of the Iranians there that they probably can't get rid of. And as you said, there's a certain segment of the Iraqi population that says, well, we want the U.S. out because we've learned to deal with the Iranians. But you also have another segment that that were the initial protesters that wanted this Iranian influence out of Iraq. They're more holistic. They wanted to become Iraqis again.
Right.
So you have both, but what you read is absolutely accurate.
Right. And then do you think that any of the bigger powers would ever get involved in this sort of say, I guess, a battle? I mean, Russia, China, what do you think
Saudi
we read on
Arabia,
that? Saudi
Israel.
Arabia, the read is Israel on what's going on right now in that environment.
Yeah, I think people definitely have their sides, but they're not getting involved because I think it will, for Israel, for example, we know that they've probably been after this guy for longer than the U.S. has. If we haven't had tabs on him, they should certainly have. Saudi Arabia, they want to diminish the Iranian influence in the region more than we do because they want to export their version of Islam in the region. The Saudis and the Iranians, that proxy war has been going on for longer than the one between the United States and the Iranians. So we definitely know what side many of these countries will be in. Russia, for example, what's their skin in this game is more so about Syria. They want to remain, they want their influence to remain in Syria. So everyone has some skin in the game, and they have their agenda that they want to push forward. The issue is that the Middle East for many, many years, probably because of the oil for nothing more, has been a free-for-all. So everyone wants a piece of that pie. And now, Donald Trump is the president that said, look, we have to have a restructuring of the world order. And, maybe he doesn't say it as eloquently as he should, but that's exactly what he's doing. He's really correcting what has been wrong for many, many years. People taking advantage of the United States, what we do. Look, this is really the world's dirty work, what we did, taking out COSM Soleimani. I did a segment on Al Jazeera on Saturday, and they actually had someone from the Iranian regime come there and say, Donald Trump is a terrorist, and what he did should be condemned by the world community. My reaction to that was, this was the biggest deed that he did for the world community. The world is a better place. He said, Donald Trump provided evidence that the world is a better place now. And I said, you and I provide the evidence that the world is in a better place now. It's really, it's interesting to watch this because I think more than anything, we know that anything that goes on in the Middle East is not about, it's perception and reality. The reality is much different than what the perception is. The political cloud is very thick, particularly over these topics. Look at the issue in Syria. We still don't know what's going on, right? And the average American, the average journalist doesn't know what's going on. There's
The
so much
average American can't point out where New York is on a map. Forget what's
so
going
true.
on in Syria.
So true. And there's so much to unpack. To really understand. I think you're asking the right questions. What are the agendas here? What does China want? What does Russia want?
Right.
What does the U.S. want? Really, and I think that was the issue under the Obama administration. The U.S. didn't know what we wanted. Why did we even want to sit at that table? How did we want it to turn out? We switched sides. Are we protecting the Bashar al-Assad regime? Do we want them out? Are we protecting the Russians? Or do we want them out? Well, now there's chemical weapons. Now we draw a red line. Now what should we do? Okay, we'll let the Russians take care of it. The same Russians that we wanted out of the situation. So I think that for many years, it's been that foreign policy has not been on the radar for journalists, for students, in our school system. We just haven't taught foreign policy. We haven't taught history. We haven't taught political science well. I think there's such a lacking there, and that's why we have such strong, incorrect opinions.
Emotional reactions,
Toddler
reactions, very fearful, very little knowledge
like
of what
I said,
they're even
you don't
talking
want to go to
about.
lunch with Donald Trump, therefore he shouldn't kill a terrorist.
Right,
That's
exactly.
really what's going on.
Right. And there also has been the argument, and I'd like to know what you make of it, that some people feel, okay, I throw in the towel, I admit that this guy was a horrible person, he wasn't a great person, but was this really a priority for America, right? And that we have a president that's running on the concept of America first and putting American interests first. And many people feel that there's a bigger threat at the border, right? And
Sure.
Certainly that is a more immediate threat in terms of securing our nation's borders.
Sure.
And why was this so high up on the list? Is an argument that we're seeing, not just on the left, but on the right as well.
Great question.
Yeah, it is. It's a great
Great
question.
question. You're absolutely right, because as much as we can point fingers and say the left has this wrong, the right has never prioritized foreign affairs either. We've never prioritized doing the right thing at the right time either because we've been so insular with domestic affairs. But let me just make the record straight on this. If we're worried about national security, if we're worried about domestic national security, I'm not even talking about our assets in the region, we have to worry about the Iranian threat. And that is because their tentacles are everywhere. If you look at the world terror, Iran's number one export is terrorism, whether in the form of one single suicide bomber putting on a vest and coming right out to the Federal Building here in Los Angeles or going to the Empire State Building in New York. These are the threats that we should worry about. And they can come here, and they did come here, and they probably are here. But the main issue here is you have to catch terrorism at its roots, not at its tentacles. And when you look at some of these individuals, I mean, Europe is really mourning the fact, I think maybe more privately than publicly, that they've been so lax on national security. They've been so lax on terrorism. And when you look at Iran, it's a state sponsor of terrorism. They want to call this is the irony of the whole situation. They want to call this guy the number 2 most important person to a sovereign state such as Iran. So this was an act of war because the president assassinated the number 2 guy, meaning and the equivalent would be if they came out and took out our vice president, right?
Right. Well, that is exactly how they're trying to make it the equivalent of.
Are they operating like a normal state? I mean, this guy wasn't even killed in the country in which they say he was number 2 in. I mean, he wasn't even there. What was he doing running around killing people and ordering? And if you don't care about Americans being killed, which I wouldn't understand why you wouldn't be, but let's just say, worry about the Syrian civil war. Hundreds of thousands being killed and being displaced because of this guy. Look at Iraq. There's a lot of, and I can go on and on and on. Look at the protests in Lebanon. Look at Hezbollah. Look at Gaza. And the Palestinians getting weapons and supplies from them and fighting the Israelis. So we look at the turmoil around the globe. We say, this has to do with America. You can draw a very direct line between Iran's terror funding and the United States' national security.
And what's interesting is that nobody wants to talk about the precursor to the event, them storming the U.S. Embassy.
Oh.
That is in and of itself an act of war. I mean, I look at Embassy Row in D.C. It's some of the most beautiful homes to look at. And when we walk down that row, I'm just sitting here imagining. Could you imagine if a bunch of Americans stormed and tried to burn down the embassies in D.C.? That's an act of war. We would never do that. It's completely uncivilized.
Right, so when they asked the question of was this number 1 on our list, but this guy didn't just spring up like a whack-a-mole.
Right.
I
like that expression.
Yeah, like okay, he came up. Should we clobber him now or should we wait? First of all, that, and secondly, President Obama went after a low-level, in comparison to Soleimani, a low-level terrorist who was at an Afghani wedding, and 23 of the wedding guests were killed.
I know. I said this the whole time. Nobody cared.
No one batted an eyelash.
I mean,
this was such a targeted attack. This was beautiful. And this, I can't care. So to me, this was a beautiful attack. Why? Because we only took out the bad guys.
right.
Every day in Iraq, there are bombings by different groups, particularly the Iranian militias, at ice cream shops, at schools, at pizza parlors, where ordinary civilians are taken out, where Americans are taken out. We see this in Afghanistan. We see this in Syria. We see this all around the world. And no one bats an eyelash. I mean, there were so many attacks on the Obama administration. The only reason, and I hate to politicize this, but this is only to basically bring everyone back into having a logical approach to this.
Right. I mean, it's unfortunate, and you're right. It should be something that's not politicized, and I don't remember it being politicized when Osama bin Laden was killed. I remember everybody celebrating and saying this was a bad guy, and we got the bad guy, and that was good. And yet we very quickly kind of arrived into a place in America where they don't care anymore about America. It's not about America. It's about what team you're on.
It's
right, and no matter what our president does, they feel like they have to be opposed to it. You don't need to like every single thing that the president does. I certainly don't like every single thing that the president does. You shouldn't like every single thing that anybody does, for the record, not even yourself. Like sometimes I'm like, man, why did I do that? But when we get to a point where we can't celebrate the taking out the bad guys, or when we get to a point where we're apologizing to evil regimes, right? People in a place where women are seen as half a human being when weighed next to men. That to me is scary, and that's a very dangerous slippery slope. And that's why I try to use my platform and talk about the direction that we're going into. Saying people just pretty much get your head up for a second, right? Look above the water. Try to see beyond where we're at today. Trump's not going to be president forever, right? But this is going to be your country forever,
Right.
and until you part from this earth. And you need to think very carefully when you speak out against things like that, because what kind of a message does it send to the international community
Exactly right.
when we have people in this country getting on their knees saying, I'm sorry to evil people in the world just because they don't like the person that's leading their country.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the perfect juxtaposition is when you have people sending, pictures with cakes with thanking Trump. Then here we're having people tweet out using their platform with millions of followers using their platform to apologize to an evil regime. I mean, really get it straight. You might not like Trump, but you're as exactly what you said. You're speaking on behalf of the entire United States to apologize to a brutal regime. I mean, I think it's just low information and high emotion.
And it's funny because, and obviously I'm oversimplifying this, but I do find that people that have come to the United States, legally, and have worked for everything they have, similar to your family. And similar to the Uber driver that took me here was from Russia. We had a very long conversation. He talked about how much he loves this country, how grateful he is to this leader, and what opportunities he's been afforded since he left Russia. He said he left 29 years ago. And I find that remarkable, that the people that tend to respect the environment that they're in are people that have lived somewhere else. And I do think that part of the blind spot that so many Americans have is that freedom almost leads to tyranny. In a way, right? They're kind of inextricably linked, right? You can have so much freedom that you just don't realize your own blessings, that you start fighting for tyranny.
Right. And look at college campuses are a great example of that. When you just they don't have the information. They are riled up to believe something that isn't true. And then they're sent out because they are bored to do something about it. With again, lack of facts, lack of that rich experience. It's because, I don't know, maybe I owe everything to my parents for having those conversations with us and for, making us feel, I wasn't an immigrant. I was the child of immigrants. But I carry that immigrant story with me, and it's so much ingrained in who I am, and that I have so much gratitude for that. And again, if I didn't have even though my mother worked in Iran and she was, she had college, she didn't feel the brunt of this regime, but it's so linked to who I am, and I'm watching those women over there, and then watching the Women's March here, which is embedded with, the privilege, but it's also embedded with an anti-Semitic message, or that intersectionality that is just so misinformed. That's all I can say. It's just misinformed. If you want to stand up for minority rights, learn first about what's going on and what you're standing up for and who the true minorities are. I think, I think we can take a big message from this current situation about us and Soleimani. And again, my question to people on Twitter or about the news show is, how did we get here? I mean, the fact that we have to talk about, not the news about Qasem Soleimani, not what the implications are for terrorism in the region and for Iran and for America and all of the national security parts, but what it means here back at home, that we can't be on the same page regarding something.
Okay, finally got this back of the head done perfectly, I think. Heck, oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I will say that the front though is not great. The front though, still working on that. I don't know how you want me to turn this head to you.